My name is Sean Metcalf, and I'm the host of the Local Government Careers Podcast, your one stop shop to learn about local government careers. Over the past 15 years, I've made my way up the ladder as the lowly intern, all the way up to the HR director, being a finance director, and city manager. Those experiences have helped me to be able to ask guests questions that help you to have a well rounded understanding of each local government position. And I'm very excited today about the position that we're exploring. It's one that's really important to local governments. We've got a communications and marketing director. His name is David Cordero. He works for the city of St. George, Utah. A little bit about his background: he's been in his current role for 6.5 years. He's been a membership director for the city, or excuse me, for the St. George Area Chamber of Commerce, marketing associate with Bay Equity LLC. He's been a public relations specialist with Sorensen Advertising. He's been an editor with St. George Magazine. And then he's been with Spectrum Daily News for 9.5 years. Did the editing for Culture and Trends and Sports and Outdoors. Also was the interim executive director. He's been a freelance writer, sports editor, the Herald Journal, and the Daily Aztec. We've got a very seasoned individual with us today, and I'm very excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me. I'm not 68 years old, as you might think, after hearing all that. But I am a little seasoned, though. That is a good way of putting it, and I agree.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I didn't mention to you before this is I've been to St. George many times.
Oh,
I would go at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, to visit my grandparents, and I have aunts and uncles that have lived in St. George. They're kind of spread out now, but I did go there quite a bit.
that's
Familiar
cool.
with the Red Rock country. It's beautiful there.
Yeah,
And
sure
it,
is.
if anyone is familiar with Utah, most of the time they think of big, tall mountains, but St. George is not like that at all. It's like it just transforms the further south you get into Utah. But I remember all the red rocks and palm trees. It's such a great place for like four wheeling, biking. I'm guessing you probably know of my grandpa's business. It's the Metcalf Mortuary.
Yeah, right on St. George Boulevard.
Yep. My grandpa started that about 60 years ago.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
yeah, when it was back, uh, I would say probably a town at that point. St. George has really grown over the years.
I'd say, yeah.
Well, let's jump into this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the classic interview question, just so the audience can get to know you better.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the kind of the family stuff, right? So
Yep.
I've been married to my wife Julie for 20 years. We got two awesome kids, 17 and 14. My son is 17, daughter's 14, and we've lived in the St. George area for 19 years now, almost 20 years. And as you mentioned earlier, it's amazing how much St. George has grown, even in 20 years. It's almost
Yeah.
unrecognizable.
Yeah, that place has exploded with growth.
Yeah, it is wild. Like I used to live, and if you don't, if you haven't been to St. George, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But I used to live on what might be considered the southern outskirts, of town. I would, kind of climb up the hill behind me and look out, and there wasn't a whole lot between where I was and the Arizona border. And now it's just exploded, and tons of houses, businesses. We got good roads put in, a bunch of schools in there,
Yeah.
and it's really amazing. And originally I'm from San Diego. I lived there 23 years, and my time in Utah has eclipsed my time in California, and so I guess I'm officially a Utahn now.
Would you call that home at this point? I guess if you've got a few more years there.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. It's my kids were born here, and Utah is where I met my wife, and so yeah, I would say that the Utah is home.
Is St. George still known as, or at least I knew it as kind of like a retirement place? A lot of people will travel south to warm up for the winter. Is it a bit of a retirement community still?
It's still a significant component. As we've grown, it's become maybe less so, just given the increase in different types of industries and education, things like that. But the retirement component is still significant, and we still have a fair amount of retirees. In fact, our governor is famous for saying there are two kinds of people in Utah: those that live in St. George and those who are going to live in St. George. And
Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
people that come down from the my friends and family that will come down from up north, and they'll be like, "Why am I not living here?" And I'm like, well, that's a good question, because you don't have to shovel the heat. It gets pretty warm
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
summers, but you
Yeah.
don't have to shovel the heat. You do have to shovel the snow, which we only get just a tiny bit here.
Yeah. No, St. George is really nice. So when you look back just in your life and getting into your career, have there been moments or or different people or parts of your upbringing that have led you to getting into your current career?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I never envisioned, when I was growing up, I never envisioned getting involved in government. It never even crossed my mind. But as things moved along, there's sort of a progression that occurred, and I'm happy to get into that if you like for me to
Yeah, yeah,
discuss my
let's jump
career
into
path.
that. Yep.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm from San Diego, and my original thought was I wanted to be an accountant. I was very shy growing up. People that know me now have a hard time believing that I was that I was shy. I was painfully shy. Like the idea of speaking in front of people, doing something like this, I would have just I would have done everything I could to avoid it.
Yeah.
When
How,
I was a
yeah,
kid.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. How did that change?
yeah, so that changed in a few ways. So as I got into college, I got a job at SeaWorld. I was a vendor. When you're a vendor, you've got to bark out your wares that you're selling. There's soda, popcorn, churros. You gotta yell it out, and so that kind of helped. And
Mhm.
then I sold knives for Cutco, and so you have no choice but to try to be outgoing and pleasant. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you're not going to sell very much.
yeah, yeah.
And so
Let
as
you
I
out of
as
your
I
shell a little bit.
yeah, come out of my shell a little bit. But when I went to junior college for a couple of years, and then I transferred to San Diego State. I was going to be an accountant, but my first accountancy class in the upper division was an 8-unit class. I don't know if you ever took one of those, an 8-unit class,
No.
and it was brutally hard. It was 2 hours and 40 minutes, 3 times a week. You just got a ton of reading to
Oh,
do,
wow.
and I was quickly falling behind. And I remember the chair of the major had come into the class to speak with us, and she said, this is great that you're taking this on, and you really have to love accounting to be able to endure a class like this. And I kind of thought to myself, I was like, I don't really love accounting. Like that was kind of a light bulb went on, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I dropped the class. And in the meantime, I had started writing. I was a sports writer for the Daily Aztec. I was just covering cross country and just learning my way. And I'd always gotten pretty good grades on my essays in English class, and my parents always encouraged me to you should do writing for a career. And I'm like, well, I don't know what does that mean. Like, I don't want to write books, like, you know. And
Yeah.
so
There's so
that was
many
another thing.
directions you can go with that, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so I was writing for the Daily Aztec, and having dropped this class, I was down to 6 units in my schedule. So I had a lot of time. So I hung out in the newsroom a lot, picked up some extra stories, learned a ton. And by the time the next school year began, I was the sports editor of the paper, and so I just loved it. It was so fun. It was so cool going to the games, writing about it, meeting all these cool athletes. And so I decided, this is what I want to do for my career once I graduate. And so I was a sports editor for 2 years, and I still kept a business major because I figured after a while doing journalism, I learned that you don't really need a journalism degree to get jobs. it's more of an experience sort of thing. If you can get the experience, add to your portfolio, you can
Okay.
build
Yeah.
your way up and move your career. So I kept my
Yep.
business major, ended up graduating with business management, and struck out on my career. Started looking for jobs. Found a job in Logan, Utah. That's the northern end of Utah. The really really cold end of Utah is Logan.
It's
And
it's pretty too. Logan
oh,
is a special place. I've spent a little time up there. It's really cool.
beautiful Cache Valley. Just
Hmm.
in the summer, it's awesome. In the late spring, early fall, it's great. But man, that 6 months of winter is pretty rough.
Uh, yeah.
But the great thing was that's where I met my wife. She was going to Utah State at the time, and I was in Logan for about 4.5 years. Kind of reached a dead end in my sports writing career. I started applying elsewhere, and I found the job in St. George in 2006, and it was to be basically the section designer. Design the newspaper each day, and then also write occasionally. When I had a chance.
Uh-huh.
And so I did that. And then, similar to my Daily Aztec experience, within a year, I was promoted to sports editor and was sports editor for about 7 years. Had a lot of great experiences. It's a tough job because you're working in the afternoons and evenings, and it's not an
Oh, right.
ideal
Yeah.
job if you want to be a family man.
Yeah.
It worked well when my kids were young and not in school yet because I was with them during the day, and then when my wife got home, she's a teacher, she would watch them. But once they got
Mhm.
to school age, it's like, when am I going to see them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're gone when they're doing their activities.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, well, I need to figure something out. I got a different job at the newspaper, as you mentioned. I did culture and trends, and was for a time I was the interim editor in chief, and I did that until January 2016, and I was three or 4 days away from 10 years at the newspaper when I was abruptly laid off.
Oh,
It was a shock, right? It was
yeah.
I hadn't seen it coming. Of course, you look back on it and you're like, yeah, I probably should have seen it coming, but at the time you don't. But it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, Sean, because having been there 10 years, I got a decent severance. So basically, between the unemployment benefits from the state and the severance I got from the newspaper, I had 10 weeks of full pay,
Hmm.
and so I had time to kind of figure out what was next. We had been in St. George for 10 years, and we were entrenched here. We were a part of the community. Our kids were playing involved in sports and dance, and we loved being here. And so at the time, I had to make a decision. It's like, well, do I try to continue in journalism or do I transition elsewhere? And as I looked at it, there really wasn't a whole lot of decent options in journalism that allowed me to stay in St. George.
Hmm.
So I figured, okay, I've got to transition to do another type of work. And I'd always kind of had an eye on PR, communications, marketing, that sort of thing, because I've always felt like a lot of the skills were transferable, were very
Oh,
similar.
absolutely.
You got to be able to tell stories, you got to be able to build relationships, and work under pressure, which is that's basically journalism in a nutshell, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh, you talk
Uh,
about being able to make you hyper focused, right? Like having that deadline bearing down on you. So with that in mind, I started looking at some PR jobs, and luckily, I was able to catch on with Sorensen Advertising, a small PR firm that kind of handled a lot of different things in that realm. And I was their public relations director. They had other people that did like media buys. You had graphic designers. You had website developers. All kinds of different things. And it was really cool. Like, it was a really really fun job. I was there for almost 4 months when I was laid off again for the
oh
second
my
time
gosh.
that
Oh,
year. And the reason
holy
I was
cow,
laid
that's a
off is,
stressful year.
yeah, it was a little rough. Um, but this time was a little bit different. The only reason I was laid off is because the owners had sold the company.
Hmm.
He had just gotten married, and he sold the company, and the new owner was retracting the operations to one location because we had
Okay.
an office in St. George, we had an office in Orem, and so here I was looking for another job, but luckily I'd built enough relationships. I was able to catch on pretty quickly at Bay Equity, and so I did that, and I was there for a little under a year. And I thought, you know what, maybe it's time to beat the next layoff. And so I found it. So I was able to get a
Sounds
job.
like a good idea.
Yeah, I was able to get a job at the Chamber of Commerce as their membership director, and here I am going into sales. So my only sales experience to that point was 20 years previously selling
Uh,
Cutco knives.
yeah.
And so I had a lot to learn, but I was able to have a lot of success. And that chamber job really set me up for the job I have now, because when you work at the chamber, you get to meet a whole lot
Yeah.
of people from a variety of different industries, from local governments. So I built really good relationships. And in fact, one day I'd gotten to an appointment early to try to sell a membership, and I was just chilling in my car. It was the summer, so I found a good spot in the shade, and I was just checking social media, killing a few minutes. Saw a message from the mayor at the time, and the mayor said, "Hey, I'm not sure if you saw this job opening, but we're hiring a communications director, and we were kind of throwing some names around, and we thought that you might be a good fit. Let me know if you're at all interested in this." And I'm reading this, and like my jaw just drops, right? So I'm just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wow,
That's so
hey,
cool that the mayor reached out to you for
the
that.
mayor reached out to me, and so I'm like, dude, this is I better apply,
Kind of give that one some consideration.
Yeah. And so I applied. And this was a brand new position. This position did not exist at the city of
Huh.
St. George at the time. Now, we did have somebody doing some of the PR stuff, but it wasn't a position in and itself. He was doing it as part of his job, and so maybe 10% of his job was doing PR, communications, marketing, things like
Oh,
that. And
wow.
so
That's kind of surprising for the size of St. George.
it is very surprising. And so I got the job, and it's been the best job I've ever had when you consider the respect I get, the balance between work life and home life that it allows, and then also the being fairly compensated for my work. When you're in journalism,
Yeah.
you're not going to be fairly compensated, and so this job has been a blessing. Obviously, it's not easy. There's a lot of challenges, but I'm surrounded by very supportive people, and it's been a great 6.5 years, and I hope to do this for many more.
That's awesome. I'm glad you love your job so much, and I know what you're talking about with the journalism. I have a few, working in local government, made a lot of friends with the newspaper, and I've been surprised just how challenging that is to almost be able to have just earn a living.
Just to
Uh,
exist,
yeah, yeah. It seems it's not right. Like
right?
the value that they're bringing, it just doesn't seem right. But yeah, I'm glad that you found something that's working better for you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
So in your current office, how many people? So is it just you in your office, or do you have anyone else that works for you?
So when we started there, it was a 3-person department. It was me, and we had a webmaster and a web developer. And at the time, our city website was completely bootstrapped. Our public facing website was built from the ground up by our web team and managed by them. Our employee eNet also was built by them and managed by them. So
Mm-hmm.
they previously were under IT, under the technology division. But when they added me, they brought them other communications. Along the way, we've added a few more. We have a part-time graphic designer that's under me, and then there's a couple of interns at any given time that I'm fortunate to have. And so that's the team basically. So 3 full-timers, a part-timer, and 2 interns. And in the meantime, about a year ago, we contracted out with a website CMS because we wanted to make our website easier to use, a little bit better looking design, and also make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we were we were compliant with ADA
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
regulations and everything. And so it made sense to do that. And so our web team, their jobs have transitioned a little bit. Now our webmaster, he's mostly he's become a very talented and certified drone photographer. So we get a lot of
Huh.
awesome drone footage from him. And so he's really kind of become more of a multimedia editor sort of person. And then our web developer has been really focusing on enhancing our employee eNet and providing training for people that want to have access for the CMS. We've had to kind of evolve in that realm. Yeah, so that's kind of our team.
So, along those lines, what are the key functions of your current role?
I would say, the key things are social media is a big one, handling media inquiries, churning out press releases, overseeing the website, communications trainings that we do. We produce a monthly newsletter and quarterly print magazine. Of course,
Mhm.
obviously, we do a fair amount of video things. I serve on a few community boards and do public speaking a fair amount, more than I could have ever imagined. And and you know what? I love it.
Well, yeah, what's that like for you?
Yeah, so I would say within just this year alone, I've done 3 communication trainings. We did one on media interviews, we did one on social media, and then written communication. Those were one per month. I also spoke a little bit at our annual State of the City address to kind of set the tone for the
Mm.
mayor. I've spoken in classroom at Utah Tech University of students that are interested in communications careers. I'm sure there are other things. We've had a few ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, grand openings
Mm.
that I've been the MC for,
Hmm.
and so yeah, so a lot of stuff. And in fact, I even was the keynote speaker at a young professionals event at the Chamber of Commerce. So yeah, I would say the last 3 months, the amount of public speaking I've done has been more intense than ever before than I've done. But it's really cool. Like
So,
I really enjoy it. Never
so
thought I'd say that.
yeah. And along those lines, there may be someone that listens to this and they say, like, this sounds really interesting, but how do I get over that fear of the public speaking? Because that is a very real thing. I mean, there's
Right.
tons of people that feel that same way. That's not an unusual thing. I put myself in that category too. And for me, it was more just like the more experience, the more exposure of doing it over and over, it just feels more comfortable. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on that as kind of that introverted accountant to what you're doing now, and you are really enjoying that. How have you overcome that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, it was a gradual process for me. I went from a lot of times you got to break the ice, and some of
Mm.
our ice is thicker than other people's, but you got to break the ice. And at SeaWorld, being able to do that, being able to shut, because you'd be like, popcorn, soda, get your soda here, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
And I was able to do that. I'd also be able to hide behind sunglasses too and a hat while I was doing it. So it kind of gradually got me going. And
Uh-huh.
then, when I sold knives, you start by selling it to your family members and family members' friends. So you kind of know them a little bit, and then you work out your contacts to people that you hadn't met before. But in the meantime, you're building up all this practice, and so to me, it just comes down to practice, repetitions, doing it over and over
Hmm.
and over again. When I was a teenager, I was scared. I was scared to death of driving, and I didn't get my license until I was 18.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, but once you start doing it, it's like, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, that's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you're in a position where you could take on, speaking roles or speak in public, the thing that I would say is if somebody asks you, immediately say yes. Because maybe you've experienced this too, Sean, but like if you say, well, I'll think about it, you'll always talk yourself out of it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
You'll outthink it. But if you say yes, guess what? You're committed. And when you're committed, you usually find a way.
Yeah, you do. I like also what you were saying about the icebreaker, because I think if you can set the tone, get everyone else comfortable immediately, I think that's a
Oh,
really important part of making it comfortable for everyone.
exactly. Yeah.
If someone were looking at this job and they were thinking, okay, what percent of time do you spend in different areas of your job, would you say? And I'm sure that this is kind of a hard question because I don't think that this is a very routine job. It's more fluctuating. It changes quite a bit day to day of what you're doing, right?
Right.
But maybe what would you say you spend, those percentages that you spend in each different area of your job?
Yeah, every day it's like an Easter egg hunt. You come to work and you have an idea of what you want to do, what you want to get accomplished, but sometimes things happen and you kind of got to roll with it and move
Hmm.
to it. Media inquiries are something that I put a lot of priority on, right?
Hmm.
Because to
Hmm.
me, if you don't have a good relationship with the media, you're going to have a hard time getting anything done. If you have a good relationship with the media, you're probably going to get the benefit of the doubt on things.
Hmm.
And if you don't, I think it may motivate them to do a little digging. And as you
Yeah.
know, when they do a little digging, they're going to find something, whether it's there or not. Does that make sense, right?
Yep.
Um, when a news agency commits to investigating on something, they're going to find something. Now, whether it's
Yeah.
something that has any significance, unfortunately, we're not the judge of that. They can play it up and
Yeah.
make it a big deal,
So
and
you
then
so you have to create the narrative, basically.
right, yeah, yeah.
Ideally.
Ideally, right? And so I, fielding those inquiries, deciding, okay, who's best to speak on this? Because my philosophy is, if it's a routine media inquiry, we should have our subject matter experts do the talking, right?
Hmm.
Because they know it better than anybody else. If it has the potential to be controversial, or there may be some delicate questions, then I try to take those over because um, it is in my wheelhouse. It's not necessarily in their wheelhouse to handle those types of questions. So
So you
so
might
getting
have, maybe it's a public works director that doesn't always do public speaking. There's a huge water break or something like that, that you're going to need them for the expertise and visiting, but then you help with kind of the public relations part, right?
exactly, I
Kind
can
of
address,
a
yeah, I can
mixture
address
there. Yeah.
how the public is, how this interfaces with the public, yeah, things like that. Because yeah, that's happened before. We've had big water breaks, and I'll reach out to our water services director or public works, and then get the facts, and then I'd answer the questions because yeah, because I've got the experience in it, and they don't necessarily have that experience. So I would
Team
say,
effort, right?
yeah, and it's like this week that has been that has actually taken a significant amount of time. We've got lots of different things going on. Nothing too crazy or controversial, but just a lot of interest in a few
Hmm.
things. And
Hmm.
so I would say that's probably about 25 to 30% this week, where usually it's like
Hmm.
10%. And then social media is always a solid 20 to 25% of things. Various writing, probably 20 to 25%. Then whatever's left is creating content, managing the website, working on trainings, counseling, or teaching staff on things. We've got awesome interns that really do cool things, but they need a lot of directions because they're interns. And
Yep.
then there's also I have spots on various boards or committees that I serve on. We have a community education channel that it's kind of like it's a cooperative. What do you call it? It's a multi-agency cooperative, interlocal agreement, basically is what it is.
Hmm.
Also, there's the Veterans Coalition, which I'm a part of. There's an America 250 committee that so all these different things
Yeah.
that you kind
Yeah.
of got to juggle.
Yeah.
Um,
You're pulled in so many different directions, it sounds like.
so many directions, yeah, and so yeah, so it kind of depends on the day, depends on the week, what you get to kind of dive into.
Yeah.
Um, so
Sounds
yeah,
like it'd be interesting every week.
it's never dull. Let me tell you, like
Yeah.
for people out there who are considering a job in government communications, you may think, well, maybe it's not as exciting as in the public or in the private sector. I would beg to differ. I would say that it is always interesting, and you will not get bored. I promise you.
So, how do you communicate with 100,000 people?
So it's gotten a lot tougher now than it was 10, 15 years ago, because with the decline of the news media, fewer journalists, less coverage out
Hmm.
there. That
Hmm.
used to be an effective way to get our message across, would be to work with the news media. I was going through my old newspaper clips a while back that I've kept, and I saw it's kind of hard to believe, but I remembered it. It was from about 2013. There was a little a little kind of a box that had like a preview box previewing the upcoming city council meeting, and I was like, wow, like the Spectrum must have really covered the city council pretty hard back in.
Mm, hmm.
Um, like they had an advanced preview saying, "Hey, here's what they're going to talk about, this, and this," and I was like, "Wow,"
Yeah.
because that just doesn't happen now. Like it right now, if being the city government, if we want to get our news out, we can do it in a variety of ways. We can put it out through press releases. We can put it on social media. Obviously, we want to put it on our website. We don't have a city podcast yet. We're hoping with our new building being built that we can start to incorporate that in some way or another. Or maybe you'll advise against it. I don't know. Well,
I,
it seems like you like it.
yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way for people to learn about local government. You
Yeah, for sure.
really
And then,
digging
yeah,
into it more. Yeah, it's different.
yeah. And then we got our newsletter that we have monthly. That's we started recently, and that's been huge. And so there's not one or two ways anymore of getting your news out. You've got to try a whole bunch of different methods to try to
Yeah.
catch people where they are.
Yep. Yep. Because you've got different generations that use different things, social media they just want a newspaper
Absolutely,
in their hand. Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge challenge to try and get information out to everyone and where they're at.
it's a big
But
challenge. Yeah, probably
yeah,
the biggest one that I have.
yeah, I believe it. Talk to us about I guess, the impact that you feel like this job has on the city of St. George. Like, what are some of those impacts or things that you've been like, I'm really proud of that we were able to help with this?
Yeah. So, well, a few things I feel like we were able to help. So we had a couple of years ago in November 2023, we had the Trails, Parks, and Recreation General Obligation Bond that was
Mm,
up. It was basically a renewal of a bond that was voted for in the 1990s, and it was, at the time there was a lot of, how should I say this, a little bit of public clamor that were criticizing government spending,
hmm.
and so we wanted to make sure that we could get the word out that not only is this bond going to help further our trails, parks, and recreation, but it's not going to cost anybody anything more than what they were
Mm,
already paying, right?
hmm.
Is basically, even though it's technically a whole new bond, it was more or less a renewal of the bond, and just being able to try to communicate to people of what this could bring, what the cost is, how small of a cost it is, but how great the rewards were, how we could leverage the geo bond money that we're going to get with our existing parks impact fees, with grants, with funding from other sources as well, but also toe the line because we can't campaign for that. It's against the law for us to campaign. We could only provide facts, right? But we were able to put enough together and educate enough people, and 63% voted in favor, and that was huge.
It's
It was
awesome.
it was huge, and so that was, I'm really really proud of that, about having a part in that, because it wasn't always well received publicly. We had a few, we call it the road show, or where we go out to different communities and present and just, again, get
Yeah.
the facts. Here's a
Hmm.
pamphlet. It's up for election. We encourage you to go out and vote, be part of the process. And most of those went really well. There was one that went rather quite awful. It culminated in a gentleman growling at me. Um,
That sounds
for
like a
the
good
first,
story.
yeah,
How,
yeah, first
let's hear
non-animal to
that.
growl at me. And so so that was pretty interesting. But
was
that was,
Was that? I mean, you're making it sound like this is like a real growl. You've got me curious.
it was so basically, here's a little background on that. So um I don't want to get too deep into the story, but we were at this community, and it was kind of a dual purpose, kind of a park planning outreach, and then also present about the geo bond. And we had a lot of questions, which is good. You always want the questions, but there was a gentleman who just kept he didn't want the answers. He just wanted to irritate.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Mm-hmm.
an older gentleman, and one of his main things was with our four city owned golf courses, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
"You're wasting your money. You need to sell the courses," and all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and
Golf
so.
courses always get picked on.
Oh yeah, and he started to monopolize the questions, and I'm like, okay, we got to wrap this up, and so I just cut him off. I said, nope, no more, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he stormed out, and as he walked past me, he it was like, "Arr!" like that.
So it really was a real
It was a
growl.
growl. It was an actual growl, and he wasn't very happy. I did. There's a few of us that talked with him afterwards, and he wasn't happy, and but we had to move things along, and so
Yeah, yeah, you have
um,
to.
yeah, you have to. I mean, and you hear about all these town halls across the country that get really, really nasty,
Yeah, yeah,
and I just that's not productive. Like I think if you want to talk about things, you got to talk about things, but at some point, I mean,
yeah,
you got to just
yeah. You got to move
say
on.
say your piece and move on.
There's
But
never-ending content of what you just described out there.
never ending. And then I want to touch on one more thing that I'm really proud of that I had played a small role in. Sean, have you heard of the Gold Star Family's Memorial Monument? Have any of those near your neck of the woods?
I haven't. No.
So basically, there are these monuments, and there's close to 100 of them nationwide. They all look the same. They're they're you can look it up and see how it looks. But basically, a Gold Star family is a family that has lost someone in their family due to service in the military,
Hmm.
and it could be killed in action, missing in action, or sadly, which is the majority of the cases are those who have taken their lives after serving in the military. And we were we had an opportunity to bring one down here. North Ogden was the only city at the time in Utah that had a Gold Star Memorial Monument, and the lady that helped bring it there, her husband was the mayor of North Ogden, and he was also killed in action in the Middle East back in the I think 2018, something like 2020. I remember exactly what year it was, but anyway, that was kind of the impetus, and we had to raise money. We weren't going to put city general funds into this. We wanted to be a community effort, and so I was involved with helping come up with the materials, the marketing materials, the press outreach, things like that. And the community, as I expected, the community rallied quickly, and we were able to get enough funds, and we had a really awesome event to dedicate it. And there were tons of people. There were probably close to 100 Gold Star family members in attendance,
Oh
which
wow.
I thought was really, really
Huh.
neat. Yeah,
No,
and
that's really cool.
yeah, it was just it was great. And in fact, it was one of the last ones that Herschel Woody Williams was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. He earned his Medal of Honor on Iwo Jima 80 years ago, and he started this organization. Although at the time he was too ill to come to our event. I remember he called, and we all talked to him over the speakerphone,
Oh
and so
wow.
that was pretty
Wow.
neat.
What a cool experience.
It was a
Yeah.
great experience, and I think 3 months later he passed. But yeah, it was really cool, and it sits in the heart of downtown St. George, in town square. So when you're here next, come on by and
Oh
check
yeah.
it out.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and it's a really cool site, and I feel like it's something really good that we did as a city.
That's so cool. What an awesome story. I think if someone is interested in going into this career, they're going to have opportunities to really make a significant difference for a community. And like you're
Exactly. And
saying,
this is something that you couldn't really foresee, right?
no, no, no. And I'm sure that, I mean, you could easily be the difference maker in that bond election passing or not. The things that you're doing very, very easily. What would you say is the hardest thing that you've had to deal with? I mean, you mentioned the growling story, which was great. But have you had, maybe a complaint or something that's come up where you've in your role, you're probably having to deal with some pretty difficult citizen complaints at times, but is there anything that stands out that you've had to work through?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a few years ago, we had a proposed property tax increase, and that was kind of a rough experience. It's a very very public experience, and there were some other extenuating circumstances that made it even more difficult, and it ended up not passing, which is fine. That's up to the council, and that's their prerogative. But it was definitely a challenging thing because there was a lot of the narrative going around was vastly different than what was actually the case. There's this narrative that the city was not financially responsible,
Hmm.
which could not
Hmm.
be further from the truth. Like our bond ratings are immaculate. We get the Distinguished Budget Award every year. Like we have the most transparent budget process around, but there are a lot of things that that were going around that just simply were not true, and it was really difficult to try to counter. And it's a lot better now than it was a few years ago. I think
Uh-huh.
and I think generally public trust in us is high, but you can't stop the very loud minority that are not beholden to any kind of facts. you know
It
and
seems like that there's some in every community. At
right.
least
And
that's been my experience.
right, it's not exclusive to us at all, but I think that's the challenge is when there's false information going around, and some of it's not at all nefarious. It's just
Hmm.
incorrect information, but that could be difficult to combat because if there's people make false claims, as a comment in our social media posts, we can reply to them and correct them. But if they're on, different, let's say Facebook groups for that matter, like it's hard to keep track. And sometimes it's like, there's maybe an unset expectation that I should be on top of all that. And it's
That's
difficult.
Yeah, that's almost impossible with how many social media groups that there
Yeah,
can
it is
be in the
impossible.
community.
Yeah,
And yeah, and you have to probably pick and choose sometimes what you decide to address on social media and right?
right.
Like you want to stop those things if it's misinformation, but it's hard to keep up with everything at times, I bet.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to be polite and you want to
Mhm.
set the record straight, but also here's the other thing is that we're the largest city. You have to go to Las Vegas in the south or to Provo up to the north to get a city our size. And so like we're the big city here, and if we got to be really careful with our tone. If we come out too aggressive, we're picking on the little people, right? And
Uh-huh.
so we really got to be kind of be careful with how we manage that. And I always try to keep in mind in my public communications that our twin pillars here at the city of St. George are activity and optimism,
Mm.
and we need to reflect that in our communications with the public. And so a lot of times it's you really got to be very careful with how you choose your words and try to be constructive. But then at a certain point, if they if the person just wants to antagonize and doesn't want to engage in thoughtful fact filled discourse, then at some point you just got to let it go and move on.
Yeah. So, what's your interaction like with the city manager, mayor, and council? Do you have a lot of interaction with them?
Yeah, very frequent interaction. I often write the speeches and articles that the mayor has. there's a couple of local magazines that want her to write articles, and she doesn't have time for that. And she's not a writer. I am, and so it just makes sense for
Yeah, let's
me
work
to do
together
it.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also city manager. We're in the same 2 or 3 of the same meetings each week, and anytime you need something communicated to the. I think a lot of people don't really factor this in, but there's basically two types of communication that people like me engage in. There's the external, which is what we've been talking about, but there's also the
Hmm.
internal with city staff, with our 800 full-time employees and 300 to 400 part-time employees, right?
Hmm.
And so one thing I actually have on my list today is to write the city manager message that he sends out quarterly. And so I meet with him, we come up with the ideas and things we want to talk about, and then I create a draft, and he makes changes and sends it out. So yeah, so
Yeah,
a lot of interaction I have between the city manager and the mayor.
that's cool. All of these things that you're saying are building trust in the community and with employees, and it's just so important. I think what you do is like incredibly important.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Yeah.
Do you use much analytics in your job?
So we use analytics kind of just to. It really helps in social media to kind of see what resonates with our followers. What can we do better? Because obviously not everything you do is gonna go viral, and unless somebody's falling down or you know
Yeah,
something else, it's very difficult to
yeah.
go viral. But I try to look at trends and see, okay, what's seems to get the most shares, most comments, whether it's photos, videos, things like that, or quite often it's the type of content. One type of content that never fails to get a lot of interaction is information on new business or developments. We get, I mean, a ton of people, because people want to be in the know, right? They want to
Hmm.
be, in their own circles. They want to be, the influencers and be the source of information. And so those get a lot of likes, shares, and comments. Things about our airport. Anytime we post, because our airport is city owned.
Uh-huh.
Anytime we post about the airport, we get a lot of people. Now, most of them are campaigning for new direct flights because we currently
Yeah.
have five,
Are
and
you a regional airport?
we're a regional airport. Yep, but there's a lot of interest in the airport. So those are a couple that we've tried to expand our coverage of, basically.
Hmm.
So we'll look at the analytics on the Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, those. So we look at analytics there. I haven't used a whole lot of third parties such as like Meltwater or those types of things. I just haven't I haven't seen the value in that yet. Doesn't mean I'll never use them, but I just haven't gotten to that point. For that, I think that's more of a convention and tourism bureau. So yeah, so those are kind of the metrics that we look at.
Okay. Do you participate in any professional organizations? Like you do go to certain conferences that are related to communications, marketing, public relations?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I'm a part of. I was a past chair of the Washington County Public Information Officer Association. Every year I attend a training by the Utah Public Information Officer Association. It's in St. George, so it's easy to get to. No excuses for missing. Really, really great training, and I think I'm helping them plan the next conference down here. And then there's also kind of a newer one that I've had some involvement in. It's the Utah PRSA, stands for Public Relations Society of America. So the Utah chapter of that,
Hmm.
and I'm on one of their committees, kind of like their St. George hub, and so we help put on, because Utah is a challenging place, in terms of topography, because you've got the bulk of the population in the Wasatch Front,
Hmm.
around Salt Lake,
Yep.
Ogden to the north, and into the south you've got Orem, Spanish Fork in there, Provo, Orem, Spanish Fork. So the bulk of the population is there, and then you've got 300 miles south of that, maybe about 200 30 miles south of that, you've got St. George, and not a lot between Provo and St. George. And so we're a little bit on an island here. And so with like Utah PRSA, for instance, we'll host watch parties for their luncheons, through Zoom. And so we'll meet in a large room and put the Zoom on, and we'll have lunch, and we'll watch the thing and talk about it. And so it's it's a cool thing. It has some connections are involved there.
Yeah.
Those are the three main ones that I'm involved in. I'm also part of 3CMA, City County Communications and Marketing Association, but I haven't really been involved in their subcommittees or their national event or anything.
Okay.
But I am a member.
If someone is trying to get into this career, which of all those different organizations is there one that you would say you should probably start here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, and I'm taking this back to someone who's, let's say they're in college. I would say there's a PRSA chapter. There's so many of those chapters nationwide. PRSA is a national organization, obviously. So there's going to be chapters, and to be a student member, you can get in at a pretty cheap rate for membership dues,
Mm-hmm.
and there you'll be exposed to a whole lot of different types of public relations jobs and companies, right? You'll have many of them will be in the public, or excuse me, the private sector. There are also some in the public sector as well. And what it'll get you is experience, because experience is the key, right? You want to get experience. You want to make connections. You want to build your network. I don't get this job if I haven't built my network. This is as easy as that, right?
Yeah.
People got to know me. They liked me. And believe me when I say this, people hire people that they like first. If it's a matter of, okay, this person has more qualifications than this person, but they're not very likable, they're going to take the likable person. You got to be able to work with people.
Yep. For
You're
sure.
going to spend more time with your fellow employee than probably you do with your spouse in a given week. And so that'll be someone that you can work with and grow with. And so building those connections, getting experience and building connections, I can't stress that enough, is the best way to do this. And if there's opportunities within a city government to volunteer and be parts of different commissions, committees, whatever, do that. That's how you get known.
Yeah.
That's how you get known. That's how trust is built, and you can potentially parlay that into future employment.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you have a few interns. How often do you take interns?
Yeah. So generally, when I started taking interns, the idea was, I'd have them for this semester that they're in, and then I get new interns. So, some of them would do the internship for internship credit, but some wouldn't. Some would just use it as a part-time job for experience, and that's fine too. We didn't require them to use it for internship credit, but we paid everybody regardless of whether you were or not, because I do not believe in unpaid internships. I think that's morally wrong. That's just my opinion. But so we started that last semester, in the fall semester. I had a little bit of a hard time finding interns. I only had two that interviewed, and I hired them both. And I'm like, oh man, hope this works out, And not only did it work out, it worked out great. And for the first time ever, I had two interns, both of whom were not graduating immediately. And so I thought, well, it usually takes 3 to 4 months to get them up to speed, and then I got to say goodbye and bring in new interns. We had an idea, the three of us, like, well, how about do you want to stay on for another semester? And they said, yeah. I'm like, well, let's do it. And that has been huge, because the training and getting people up to speed takes so much time and effort. And I noticed that I wasn't really reaping as many awards as I thought I should be previously. But now I am, because they're getting really good content. They've got, good idea of kind of, what we want, how we want it, kind of understanding a little bit how city governments work. And it's been great. They've done a lot of cool video content. The ideas they have are great. These are people, half my age or even less than half my age. So they're going to have a different perspective than I do.
Yeah.
of things. And so it's been really rewarding to see them learn and grow. And I've seen some that have gone on to getting full-time jobs here locally
Oh, cool. Yeah.
once they finish their internship, and that it makes me feel like a proud papa when
Oh,
that
that's
happens.
really cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, what could an intern expect to be paid there?
Yeah, so we pay, I think it's about $13 an hour, I think is what we're at.
Okay.
You could make more money, making fries at In and Out, but you're going to get great experiences. You're not going to get dirty.
Yeah.
And if you do a great job, you're going to have one heck of an ally in me to help you on your next step of your journey. And the thing I always tell the interns is no internship is the same, right? Because I want to understand what their goals are. And at the end of the internship, I want them to be able to put 4 bullet points on their resume of really solid, meaningful work that they've accomplished to help them get their next job.
Perfect. That's exactly what you'd hope for an internship.
Yeah.
What would be a salary range for a smaller city versus a maybe medium or large city?
That's a great question. At least in Utah, now it's gotten a lot better. So since I was hired, Washington City has hired a full time communications person. Cedar City has, and also Hurricane has, and so more government agencies in Utah are seeing the value in these positions, as opposed to having their city recorder or some or the mayor basically doing that stuff. So I would
Yeah.
say for a city of 20,000, you're probably 50,000. I'd say is probably the salary that you would probably look at there. You would probably have to do, in addition to PR and communication, you probably have to do a fair amount of event stuff too.
Hmm.
And kind of you're basically the all the above, none of the above kind of person. That,
Yeah.
okay,
Oh,
who's
yeah.
going to do this? Oh, so and so, because
You're
if it
wearing
doesn't
lots of
fit,
hats.
right? Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because it could be a really good place to get experience, because you probably would not be reporting to somebody in the PR communications, because you would be it, right? In a city of that size, they've got room for one. It's not
Yeah.
till you get to 60 or 70 where you might have another person on the team to
Yeah.
help, right?
Yeah.
Your communications aren't going to be super sophisticated until you get to that mark. Entry level is big, but network that helps you kind of move along.
Yeah. What could someone expect maybe in the middle size population?
Yeah, so
Maybe
the middle.
80,000, 100,000, somewhere in there.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a director, in the 80, in the 100,000 range for a director is something that's if it was less of a director position, more of like a specialist or a coordinator, probably in the realm of 60,000. If you had a city of, let's say, 115,000, and you had your number two person,
Uh-huh.
somewhere in that range, I think is probably the going rate.
Yeah. I guess that can vary, of course, by state to
Very
state,
by state,
cost of
yeah,
living, where you're at, and yeah. Um,
exactly. Some places that can go a long way, others not as much. So,
right, right. So, what's the required versus preferred education for this position?
a college degree is generally required. Um,
Bachelor's.
yeah, bachelor's degree. Not really any certifications that are required, anything like that. I don't have an APR, but if people had an APR, they would maybe be able to negotiate a little more. An APR stands for Accreditation in Public Relations.
Okay.
It's a process you can do, but every hiring agency will have their own qualifications or things that they're looking for that's specific to that
Yeah.
job. But the experience, I think, is important. A lot of them will say that they want 3 to 5 years in government experience, or in government work or related experience, right?
Uh-huh.
So you always
Yeah.
got to look at that related experience. Okay. And so, like, when I applied here, the chamber I felt like was related experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Seems like
felt
there's
like
a lot of different ways you could get that related experience.
exactly my time as a journalist, as an editor, I felt like that was related experience, right? That's big, and I think a fair amount of HR places use the sort of a software that helps them when they get a bunch of resumes that they kind of pair through just to make sure that you meet the minimum requirements. So one tip I would say is really look at the minimum requirements and make sure you're addressing each of those.
Hmm. For sure.
Otherwise, your portfolio might just be sent to the reject pile without a human even looking
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's good advice. And how competitive is it to get into your role, would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there were three or four other finalists when I got this job. At least the people that I had heard had either they told me themselves when they were congratulating me, or I heard otherwise. But I would say it's fairly competitive, and the better the compensation, the more competitive it is. So yeah, and obviously it depends with the job market too. With when the unemployment is really low, there you know isn't as much competition for jobs. And like I'll notice it citywide, like some jobs are really difficult to hire for
Yeah.
when our
Yeah.
unemployment was 3% or 2.6 or whatever it was.
Yeah. Market
But
dependent.
as it ticks up, then it becomes more competitive. Then it becomes more of a employer's market, where they get on average a better crop of applicants just based on the unemployment rate.
I'm curious, with your position, you've probably seen different paths that people have taken to get into your position. Could you identify maybe another path or two that you've seen someone take to be able to get into your role? Because I know,
Yeah.
like your path is just ideal with the writing experience and editing, all of that.
Yeah, I would say, as I've gotten to know and befriend people of similar positions in the state of Utah, I would say that a fair amount of them have that news background. In the news background helps you get the job done. There's a lady up north. She was in TV news prior to getting into local government. I know a couple that were in newspapers. I haven't met anybody that went to school specifically for this kind of job
Hmm.
in the
Interesting.
yeah, at
Yeah.
least in city government communications. It's
Yeah,
kind of
which tells you there would be a lot of different paths then in that case.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think there's lots of different paths, and it's getting the experiences, and quite honestly, I think if you can find a way to get the word director in your title, that
Mm.
helps a lot
Hmm.
because titles don't matter when it comes to getting the job done, but titles matter when it comes down to getting a job. And
Yeah.
if you could show your good titles at all, it automatic whether it's fair or unfair, it automatically brings your level of respect higher. Time for the hiring process.
Yeah. I bring that question up just because there could be someone that's listening that maybe they're, I'm just gonna make this up, a Parks and Rec director that's getting a little tired of that job, that role, and they want to change. They could make their way into a role like this. They
Yeah,
have that director level position. They've worked with the public, just so someone thinking about that could realize that that is a possibility.
for sure. And what I would say to them is that I would look at their current job and see, okay, what have I done in the communications realm that I could show my future employer that I could do this. So have I written anything that's been published? How what is my public speaking history? How have I done any kind of social media in my job? And if so, what have I done? What have I learned? That sort of thing. And another thing, like when I got my job, there wasn't a whole lot of appetite, and I didn't expect there to be for like extensive training. It was like, hey, here's the job. Here's kind of what we want. Have at it.
Yeah, it's an
and,
interesting experience for sure.
and so you want someone that at least knows how to get started. And I think that's something that I probably brought to the table more than the others is I know how to get started, and we'll learn along the way. We'll adjust, we'll evolve, but getting started is sometimes the hardest part about anything.
Yeah. You've given a ton of really good advice. I think, like, if I were listening to this and considering this as a career, I feel like I would have lots of good ideas of what to do, how to proceed. Is there anything else that comes to your mind of like just general advice that you would give someone to either to get into the position or to do well in the position? Just anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, I would say, one thing, and it's been a gradual process, but I think I've really done a good job of this in this current role, is you really have to suppress your ego.
Hmm.
Um, it's not about you, you know, it's about the public, it's about getting the job done, it's about communicating, and you can't care about where the credit goes.
Hmm.
Because, like, for instance, let's say the state of the city. Okay, every year we put on the state of the city. Every year I think we've done a better job, and every year the mayor gets a ton of great kudos and appreciation and everything, and she's always very quick to relay that to me and my staff and those that helped, and she
Hmm.
very much appreciates what we do. But I can't, like, I've got to let her have the I've got to let her bask in the excitement, in the glory, right? I understand my job is as a support person, right? I am
Hmm.
supporting our elected officials, our city manager, and depending on the day, our other directors throughout our city. And so it's really suppressing that ego. It's not like not caring that, okay, people here need to understand that I did the bulk of the work, like that's not important. Nobody cares.
Hmm.
Nobody cares who did the work. They care
Hmm.
that it got done. They care that the information was shared, that this initiative, has caught on, that people came to your event. That's what they care about. And so if you're concerned about the credit, you may have a hard time in city government because the credit isn't always there. And that's not saying anything detrimental about anybody. That's just the facts. Like
Yeah.
when I was in newspapers and I wrote an article, my name was on it, right? And people could see that it was me that wrote it. Now, half the articles I write have somebody else's name on it,
Yeah.
or social media posts. I could write a super clever social media post, but there's no credit attached to me,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that. And you've got to be okay with that to be able to do a job like this and be effective. And then also we go back to another aspect of suppressing the ego is you're going to work with a lot of different people in a lot of different departments, even in other agencies, and sometimes you got to meet them where they're at. And they may have different edits of things that you've written or done, or have
Hmm.
different ideas,
Hmm.
and you have got to humble yourself and try to listen to where they're coming from, because they're always going to be coming from a different spot than you. And just realize that all that matters is that you do the job well. It doesn't matter if you had the original idea and it carried through. It doesn't matter if they had the original idea and it carried through. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if 30 people pitched in and worked around and had this idea. It all that matters is that you get the job done.
Yeah. I love that. That is really, really wise advice.
Thanks.
Because you definitely are not going to get the credit all the time, but that's what it's all about is that public service, and it's for the intrinsic reasons is why people generally are in local government. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Intrinsic's one of my favorite words.
yeah. No, I love that. That's really, really great advice. Is there anyone that you want to give a shout out to that maybe has helped you in your career path that's made a difference for you?
Yeah, going back to Mayor John Pike, who had, as I mentioned earlier, put the seed in my head about maybe coming to work for the city of St. George, was a
Mhm.
had a huge impact. Just his leadership. I learned a lot from him, and how he could work a room in a meeting and make everybody feel included, make everybody feel valued. That was really
Wow.
huge, and so I really try to take that to account. If I'm leading a room and we're asking for ideas, and just really try to make
Yeah.
everybody feel important, feel valued, and hearing people with the intention of listening and learning rather than
Mhm.
using it to move your thoughts along.
Yeah. Awesome. If someone's interested in reaching out to you, is it okay if they contact you?
Please do, yeah. And they could, and I'll give you my cell phone, because I have no problems giving my cell phone out. If they want to text or if they want to call, there's certainly feel free to do that. And it's 435 512 1511.
You would be such a good mentor for someone trying to get into this field.
Oh, I'd love to be a
So
mentor for someone. That'd be great.
thank you so much for doing this. I
Mm.
really appreciate it. And if someone is listening to this, I think it could make a difference for them in trying to figure out how to get into this career, what it's like, how to manage it. And yeah, you've done just a fantastic job. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks. I was happy to do it.
Okay, well, this is the Local Government Careers Podcast, your one stop shop for learning about local government careers. And thanks for joining us.